Okay, with that introduction, I get long-winded when I talk about this stuff because it's kind of interesting. Let's look at what, in the time that remains, look at anabolic androgenic steroids. You all know testosterone. I'm sure you could draw the structure of it in your sleep, right? From your biochem lecture, right? Tell me yes, please. By the way, just to do a little poll, how many of you actually looked, I don't mean thought about looking, but actually looked at the key for the 4th exam in the last module? How many of you actually looked at it? You did. Just one. Did you look at the key? You don't even remember that you took an exam. How many looked at the key? You did. Ms. Jennings, right? I remember something. You remember anything you saw that looked kind of interesting? That I put in red? I believe I put it in red.
A question from Dr. Moses.
Right, okay. If you really want to get on Dr. Mosher's good side, look at that. Okay? Because she said students come to her rotation and they don't remember this. So remember it. Don't tell her I told you. Okay? You'll really impress her. Okay. So much for that. The biosynthesis of steroids, which I know you remember from biochem. Remember, it all starts with cholesterol. And where does cholesterol come from? Outside of the diet, of course. How do you make cholesterol in the body? What do you start with? Well, yeah, you start with the liver, but what chemical do you start with? No. Okay, going back. Squalene, acetate, remember? Acetyl-CoA. Just want to see how much you remember from biochem. All right. So cholesterol to pregnenolone to dehydroepiandrosterone, androstenedione to testosterone. And then, notice androstenedione is called andro. We'll talk about andro. Dehydroepiandrosterone is DHEA. Androstenedione, well, testosterone. But remember that androgens are made before estrogens. And you can always remember that because estrogens don't have a methyl group in the between those two rings, between the A and the B rings. It's aromatic. So that methyl group is lost, and it's lost because it's made from androgens. Androgens go to estrogens. Okay. And if you remember that at our 25th reunion, I'll really be impressed. Okay. Androgens, although we associate with male, I also use this same set of slides, a little variation, for lay groups because the subject matter lends itself to that. So although I'm sure you all know this, but lay groups often are surprised to learn that androgens play a role in both sexes, not just males. You see, in females, you notice it when you have insufficiency of androgens. You have certain effects, mood alterations, etc. But also we associate, obviously, with males and their effects on voice, libido, and the like that you're all familiar with. The active form of testosterone is the dihydrotestosterone, DHT, reduction of that double bond. So compounds that block that enzyme, of course, are useful in treating BPH, for example. Oops. These are the approved uses for these drugs, the ones that are called anabolic androgenic steroids. In males, in males, used for primary hypogonadism. In females, see, we can use them in breast cancer, for example, endometriosis. And in both sexes, there's certain anemias that are amenable to testosterone and similar drugs. But then we have a whole host of off-label uses. Things that are not approved by the FDA. And at the bottom of that list, not necessarily in order of popularity, obviously, is to enhance athletic performance. And I've been giving this talk for many, many years. And I remember once I gave it to a group of weightlifters / bodybuilders. When I showed them this was what I looked like in those days. But I always have fun with the group because these were people who knew far more about the subject than I would ever know. Because, well, they would never admit it, but they were using these drugs for bodybuilding. In fact, I remember distinctly, sometime in the mid-'70s, I was at the Henry Ford Library in Dearborn, and I met with a group of locals who had a bodybuilding club. And that's the first place I ever heard of the name Schwarzenegger. What's his first name? Norman? Arnold, of course. Arnold. How could I forget that? Arnold Schwarzenegger. Because he was being discussed by the group. I remember they showed a picture of the bodybuilding magazine. His picture was on the cover. He was all the rage among them, long before he went into acting and politics. And they asked me, do these things really work? Well, what did I know? I said, well, all I know is what I read in the books, and the textbooks tell you they don't work. And that was a common theme. I mean, ask physicians. They said, well, they don't really work. Well, these people knew better. This slide, I meant to erase that slide, but this one is what I wanted to show you. Some of the effects of the anabolic androgens that make them useful in athletics. They increase muscle mass, and they certainly do that. They increase nitrogen retention, which basically means they build up protein in the body, an anabolic effect. In fact, this is one of the uses that used to be applied to this group of drugs, although I don't see it on the FDA list of approved uses today. And that is in cancer patients who were wasting away, that they used to use these drugs to help build up muscle mass. For some reason, I don't know the reason, they have, it's not on the list of FDA approved uses. But that was a big use back in that time. So you see here, they decreased body fat, induced aggressiveness, which might be helpful if you're a football player, especially a lineman. But just as an aside, did I read that? I just looked at the thing on the headline that some coach had paid players to injure other players.
The Saints defensive coach.
Saints
New Orleans Saints, yeah.
Yeah, well.
$1,500 if you take him out in New York.
Oh. Well, as you can see, some of these effects are perhaps valuable to someone who's an athlete, but this can be carried too far, such as the induced aggressiveness. And what we'll see later is roid rage, steroid rage,